The first 17 years of the 21st century have brought much with them. We have made extraordinary leaps in technology. We have seen unprecedented athletic achievement. We have lost great leaders who made large impacts, but we have gained new ones, issuing in a new era, a first of its kind. The world has felt fear and lost many. Even without human involvement, there has been heartbreak. But there have also been moments of hope. We have seen intense, powerful moments, and we have witnessed great change and progress. But throughout it all, the ups and the downs, we have seen the strength of the human spirit. We have seen bravery and unity in moments of chaos. We have seen people show love in situations of hatred. We have seen the power of human will triumph. Yet amidst all of this, we have taken steps backwards and given in to hatred. The events in Charlottesville this summer reflected the tensions that still undermine the values of equality and justice. The African American race still experiences overt, explicit racism as well as the effects of structural racism that are embedded into society and contribute to economic and political disenfranchisement. Since 2016, there has been a 17% increase in the number of hate groups present in the US. Some have blamed this on the new US President, Donald Trump. Comparisons between Obama and Trump have displayed significant differences in the way the two presidents respond to divisive issues in times of crisis. Amidst the riots that erupted in Ferguson after the death of Michael Brown, Obama held a press conference to comment on the situation. He acknowledged and validated the hurt and frustration that the African American community was experiencing. He acknowledged the First Amendment right to assemble and that most protesters were doing this peacefully, but he called out the small segment that were not. At the same time, he highlighted that police misconduct and violence was unacceptable. Most of all, he called for listening, understanding, and the unification in a time that was emotional and painful for many Americans. In his short time as president so far, Donald Trump has incited large amounts of people by responding questionably to contentious issues. One example of this was his address to law enforcement officers at Suffolk County Community College in New York this year. He told officers, "Don't be too nice," when placing individuals they had taken into custody into police cars and sanctioned roughing up individuals that they had arrested. Trump's attempt to establish rapport with law enforcement officers only achieved the opposite. The executive director of the Police Executive Research Forum, Chuck Wexler, denounced Trump's remarks, stating that Trump's sanctioning of the use of excessive force by police officers was the wrong message, especially coming from the President of the United States. Trump's comments outraged large segments of the population already livid over past instances of police brutality, and many police chiefs quickly distanced themselves from his words, or outright condemned them. As the primary public vote of the United States government, the President needs to foster legitimate response methods, understanding, and unity in times of trust. Donald Trump's failure to do so has only increased public outrage, divided communities, and allowed for politically incorrect opinions to be voiced more freely. Furthermore, it has built up the climate of mistrust that arose from the perceived lack of prosecution and convictions of law enforcement officers. The Black Lives Matter movement has given voice and provided discourse to many communities, ultimately symbolizing the growing frustration and distrust that is aimed towards the state. 3 radical African Americans began the movement in 2013 in response to the murder of Trayvon Martin and the acquittal of Officer George Zimmerman, who shot him. The members of the now global network organize and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on black communities by the state and vigilantes. The term police brutality is often quoted, and for legitimate reason. In 2017, there have been only 10 days where no one was killed by a police officer. Most days this year, there have been more than 3 fatalities at the hands of law enforcement personnel. What is even more concerning is how police brutality and police shootings disproportionately affect the African American community. Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed by the police than whites. Of the 1,079 people killed by the police this year, African Americans were 279 of these, representing 26% of those killed, despite being only 13% of the population. Despite these numbers, 30% of black victims were unarmed, compared to 21% of white victims. Research has found that police brutality varies by location and police department. Buffalo, New York has a slightly larger general population, minority population, and violent crime rate than Orlando, Florida. However, no people were killed there in 2015. In comparison, 15 people were killed in Orlando that year. Through his research on police brutality, Harvard economist Roland Fryer Jr. found that the police were more likely to push and shove minorities, handcuff them, use batons, and pepper spray them. It is no wonder that frustrations continue to grow and that such emotions have given rise to broader movements attempting to combat this form of injustice. During his time in office, President Obama remarked that one of the great things about the United States was its ability to maintain a distinction between its military and law enforcement. However, the violent scenes in Ferguson seem to suggest otherwise. Given that the U.S. military and local law enforcement should be separate entities in order to ensure civil liberties, many have begun to question why the police and their equipment seem military-grade. While Obama remarked that upgraded technologies for local law enforcement were in response to a lack of preparedness during 9/11 and the realization that communities were ill-equipped for large-scale threats, it is disheartening to see these developments being used on Americans fighting for their own civil liberties. The militarization of local law enforcement agencies, however, can be traced all the way back to the presidency of Lyndon B. Johnson. His 1965 Law Enforcement Assistance Act was the first piece of legislation to establish a direct role for the federal government in local police operations, court systems, and state prisons. Johnson himself declared that he hoped 1965 would be remembered as the year when this country began a thorough, intelligent, and effective war against crime. The 1965 legislation began a grant-making agency within the Department of Justice, which enormous amounts of money were used to purchase bulletproof vests, helicopters, tanks, rifles, gas masks, and other military-grade hardware for police departments. With these additions to local law enforcement, the metaphorical war on crime became a real war. The legislation also had significant effects on arrest rates and sentencing, with disproportionate amounts of African American youth finding themselves locked up for first-time offenses and drug-related charges. Perhaps what is of greatest concern is the rapidly deteriorating relationship between law enforcement and the public, specifically African Americans. Excessive use of force by police officers, a lack of state action against such personnel, and a lack of compassion and response from the US president has left the African American community feeling isolated and unprotected. The rise in the number of hate groups only adds to these feelings. Furthermore, police officers are tasked with encountering an angry and distrusting civilian population. The Second Amendment right to bear arms provides a problem that is not present in other countries. Officers must make split-second decisions under stress to protect their own safety from individuals who may have guns when addressing hostile and violent situations. A gun can be drawn and fired within a few seconds. 36 police officers in the US were shot and killed in the line of duty in 2015. To put this into perspective, none were killed in either Australia or the United Kingdom. Perhaps one necessary course of action is addressing the culture and laws that surround gun ownership in the US, so that situations of conflict between the community and law enforcement may be brought down a scale from the often fatal level that they are at. Ultimately, the relationship between police officers and the community needs to be improved upon through community interaction in a peaceful manner and on a regular basis.